Oh, good evening, everyone. Um, how has the week been? Trying to get on my setup good and going. Okay, so yeah, today we're starting a little bit late. It's actually very interesting. I have been thinking for the longest time about what today's conversation will be about, and I think earlier today something occurred to me um, that a lot of the time, okay, I'm trying to capture my thoughts a lot more clearly. I think one of the things I just realized when I was thinking about it is that the hardest thing you would ever really do is be consistent. I think a lot of we underestimate how hard it is to be consistent. It is extremely, extremely hard to be consistent. It is everything else. What I've found out just thinking through it and obsessing over the last couple of weeks is the amount of effort and intentionality it takes for you to be consistent. Um, and it doesn't really matter whether it is you want to get a new job, you want to learn a new skill, you want to, all of the goals you've written down for the year or all of the ambitions. What I've realized is it doesn't really matter. At the end of the day, is how do you build consistency? All of the greats that we know of, what stands them apart is not that it didn't just suddenly happen. It was they stuck at what they were doing and they became extremely consistent, extremely consistent, extremely consistent. And because sometimes it's so easy not to, right? It's so easy to say, "Oh, the weather is not great today. Let me just take the day off. Let me just rest. I am so tired. Maybe not today. I'll do it another time." I remember I was speaking to someone a few days ago. I was speaking to a man a few days ago, and we were talking, and I was like, he was asking me what do I enjoy doing. I'm like, oh, on the weekends I usually love to play lawn tennis with my friends. It's something I started doing a bit last year, in the middle of the last year. But the weather is really, really bad at the moment. It's extremely cold. It's -3 degrees today, actually. So obviously, that's been out of the way for a while. And he was like, "Oh, he enjoys running," and I was like, "Oh, I've always loved the thought of myself going out and running." And I've actually found people that even in the cold, when the weather is extremely cold, they were out there still running, still staying fit. And again, what I've learned is how do you get to the point where it is beyond from just saying you're talking about something to doing it and to being consistent at it and to being obsessively consistent at it? You know, I'm planning to probably write a much more detailed thinking about my thoughts around consistency. But what I've found out is, again, irrespective of what the goal or what the aspiration is, the one element you need to figure out and nail is being consistent. If you can figure out a way to be consistent, and I think sometimes we try to jump to be on the extreme. So the goal is you have never done something before and you are trying to not start and be comfortable just showing up. And I think that's the first thing. Okay. So the way I think about it is that if you think about all of the things you need to do, my goal is I want to start. What was a good example? I want to start running, right? Every day, or depending on whatever the frequency is, How do you ensure that, irrespective of how you feel or what's going on, whatever the time is, you get yourself out and you run? It doesn't mean you don't have to run a mile. You don't have. You could just probably run from the beginning of your street to the middle of your street, and that could be it. But you say, you know what? I'm going to do this every single day. It's a small, easy target. It's a small, easy goal. How do I figure out a way to consistently nail that goal? Do not necessarily try increasing it or saying, hey, I want to run the entire street. I want to walk 10,000 steps. The moment you start setting that kind of goal, you probably get it done the first time. You get extremely exhausted and you never do it again. You're like, oh, it's going to take me a week to recover. Again, you've just gone from 0 to 1,000 and you've burnt out, right? But how do you get yourself one to show up every single day? There are weekends like this where I've told myself, I made myself a promise when I started this, was that I was going to do this live stream every weekend. If you know me, you would know that I am relatively very, I like to keep to myself a lot. So ideally, I like to be in my space, not talking. I like my privacy, right? But for me, again, part of this entire exercise is myself also learning and building that habit of, how do you become consistent? How do you show up consistently every single time for the things you say you will do? How do you ensure that you do it? Even when you don't feel like it, even when it doesn't feel so exciting, but how do you start building that habit of showing up, of showing up, of showing up? And if you can build that into, if you consistently show up over and over again, it gets to a point where it no longer feels like you are having to do it. No longer feels like work. You no longer need that push, that force. You just find yourself doing it naturally. In fact, it will then start feeling weird if you're not doing it. You know, and I think that that's the one thing, that if there's anything to look through everything you're doing in your life, is these things that I've told myself I want to do. How do I become consistent in the small things, not in the big things, not in trying to jump or no. How do I get consistent doing it in the small formats? Find the smallest possible denominator of that action. How do I consistently do that? You know, a couple of weeks ago, I promised myself every day before I go to bed, I'm going to try read a chapter or some passage in some of the books. So what I did now intentionally is, I've put set up an alarm. One, two, I've taken the book and from my office space where I am at the moment, and I've placed it right beside my bed. So now the alarm lets me know, hey Francis, it's time to, you actually promise yourself that you always read some part of this book before you go to bed. And is I'm kind of creating that process on my system where now eventually it goes from just being something that I have, trying to kickstart myself to do, to become a natural habit, because I want to develop that habit, right? If you say you want to go to the gym, if you say you want to eat healthy, again, it is not in saying, oh, I've been eating so much meat, I want to become a vegetarian, I'm going to throw away all of the meat. Again, you would crash and burn because it's extremely intense. How do you find, what's the small piece of action? What's that small step? How do you build that into your flow? How do you get yourself consistent in that action? And then how do you start layering on, pick another piece and add to it, and pick another piece and add to it, and pick another piece and add to it? And if you find all of the people we see today that are extremely successful in every sphere of life, it is not that they were, yes, there are people that had gifts or talents, which is great, but even in those gifts and talents, it is the consistency of putting in the work, of consistently doing a set of action over and over and over and over and over again, that it gets to the point they no longer think about it. You see footballers that, if you set that guy up with a free kick or whatever, he knows every single time, he knows how to take that shot, even in the Even if you wake him up from his sleep, he will take that shot and not miss it. Why? He has done that shot 1,000 times. He has done that shot 10,000 times. He has done it so much, so well that he knows all of the permutation. He has refined it to a method. So, how do you become so good at something? It is purely by being extremely consistent. Figure out whatever you want to do or whatever you're doing and ask yourself, what would I like it to be like? What singular small improvements would I like to see? And start putting measures in place to say, hey, if I want to do this, okay, if I need to set an alarm, if I need to uh, put the actions around it, so it starts making it a lot more easier for me to develop those habits. But the one thing that will set you apart, that will make you achieve those goals, is not in talking about it, is not in writing about it. And it's great because the Bible tells us about writing the vision down, making it plain so that anybody that sees it can run with it. All of that is extremely fantastic and it's very important. But in fact, I was thinking and I was telling myself, I said, the one thing we can even take away about the nature of God is that God is consistent, you know? And that for me is very, very interesting. It tells us that he is the I am that I am, is the same yesterday, today, forever. What that means in my head when you boil it at the end of the day is that he is consistent, you know? His word doesn't change. He doesn't change as a person. And so when I think about it, is that when you think about all of the things you said, saying it is, are you willing to put in the work to for those things to happen? And if you try to jump from saying, "Oh, I see people are doing it," I want to walk 10,000 steps, when you've never walked 500 steps, you might actually get it done a couple of times, but you would not build that into a habit. It will not become a part of you. If you want to eventually walk 10,000 steps, get out tomorrow, get out today. Again, start it today. Don't put it off if you can. Go walk 500 steps today. Go walk 200, go even walk 10 steps. Go walk 200 steps, Do that every day for a week until it doesn't feel like you're doing anything, and gradually increase that. Okay, now to 200, now to 500, now to 1,000. You'll be amazed with how much easy to get to for you to hit 10,000 and maintain 10,000 without so much of a hassle than saying, "Oh, I want to start I want to start walking every day, but now I want to walk 10,000 steps," when you've never done it before. In fact, and I'll probably go into this story a lot more in the future once the story finally develops. There's something I paid for, and today was my first class. Um, um, and I went for the class. And weirdly enough, I was also being a bit self-conscious. So I got there, the people around, and eventually the class started. And I was just like, oh, this doesn't seem, it shouldn't be so hard because I've, when you look at other people doing it, just from looking at it, it didn't look that complicated. It didn't look that hard until I started. And within 5, 10 minutes, I was out of breath. I was like, dear Lord Jesus. Again, when you look at something from the outside, a lot of the time it looks easy, it looks uncomplicated, it looks like, come on, duh. Is it not just to do this and do this and do this and do that? Yeah, like, why are they making a fuss out of this entire thing? But when I was in it, I was like, dear Lord Jesus, this is way more intense than I could have thought it to be. But again, for me, is that, and I realized again that initially I was trying to do so much, and the instructor was like, "Hey, calm down. Let's start. Let's start from the basics. Let's start from the easy part. Let's do this part consistently, and let's ensure we nail this part." And then we did that, and we did that, and we did that, and then at the end of the session for today, I was doing really well. And I was like, "Hey, you can see now that you've done that part consistently, and it's already showing off." You know, and again, it was again why I said I wanted to talk about it today. And I was like, huh. Again, one is whatever you're thinking about doing, find a way to be consistent in the little things. Be consistent in the things you say, be consistent in the things you believe, and be consistent in the things you do. There's something I posted a few days ago that we are where we are in our lives because of the things we've believed, the things we've said, and the things we've done. And if you do not like what that looks like, or you want a different life, or you want different parts your life to evolve in a different direction, then we need to consistently, intentionally, and consistently change the things we believe in or we believe, consistently and intentionally change the things we say and what we speak about our lives, situations, and things around us, and be very intentional and consistent about the things we do. You can't believe one thing, say another thing, and do something very different. All of that have to come into alignment. So, as you start thinking about all of the things that you are dealing with, that you are exploring in your own personal life, think about how can I become more consistent going forward? How do I become very intentional about the things that I want to do and be consistent in those things? You know, in the things that you say, in the things that you believe, and in the things that you do. And how do you eventually get to the point where it becomes a habit? You know, so those are like my thoughts for this weekend. Like I said again, I can tell you that this stuff I do every weekend is an internal battle with myself, but I love it because again, for me it is. I think it's the biggest training or the biggest course where I'm doing this year is also learning to intentionally build that muscle of being consistent even in the things that I say I will do myself, even when they feel extremely uncomfortable, extremely they don't feel easy. They don't feel. I'm like internally, but just making sure that I show up every single time. The one thing you need to think about is how do you ensure you are showing up every single day, every single time. So yeah, that's all for me. I hope you have an amazing weekend, an amazing month ahead. I'd like to know what your thoughts are. What are you trying to be consistent in? And how are you what measures are you putting in place to be consistent in different areas of your life? Other than that, have a great weekend and bye.